Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think my favorite story to try and explain this subject is sort of the mind experiment, using that. Imagine the situation that we 10 years ago were allowed a big experiment saying we try and figure out if we built or made 3 shipping companies. We gave them the same vessels, completely identical. We put the same hardware in there. We had them built at the same shipyard. We allocated the resources from, or you could say the crew from the same countries. In total, you could say, if we look at these 3 companies, if we were allowed to make that experiment and then we moved 10 years ahead, what company would then be the most successful? I think as soon as they start sailing, they have the same starting point, you could say. They have the same equipment and they will be entering into the same markets. So the conditions for their operations will, in principle, when they start that journey, be the same. It's the same criteria they are up against. Now, my subject today is about organizational performance, or how do we get organizations actually to cultivate human performance. And my claim is that the company of these 3 companies who was best at organizing their work would potentially also be the winner after 10 years. And if you look at it, if you look at organizations, or if you look at how we talk about things in the maritime business, we often talk about technology, KPIs, systems, training, etc., etc. But how often do we talk about how well we organize our work? Because organizations, they don't just work, we have to make them work. And what does that take? Especially also seen in a safety context, because really what we could do also say driving safety performance seen from an organizational perspective. So what is it that we should try and look at, and what is it that we need to try and keep an eye on in this perspective? And I'm going to try and give you some examples here. Now, the beauty about my job is that I get to visit really many different companies. And right now, Green-Jakobsen is running projects for shipping companies from South America to the Philippines. We get to visit extremely many organizations, me and my colleagues, over a year. And over my career, I've had the pleasure of working with really many renowned organizations. And it's quite clear that when you have that opportunity, when you start looking into how companies organize their work, there are big differences. And sometimes you are amazed how little attention these differences are given and the focus that they have on key elements. We tend to isolate the discussions. When we say, what are the KPIs, what is the technology, what are the systems? But the interaction of people, how they work together, is also an element we feel should be addressed. Now, what is also my motivation here? Well, one thing which is also very clear is that far too many initiatives never really succeed due to poor organizational capacity. And that's a new word I would like to introduce, organizational capacity. One thing we often see is that when we talk about organizations when they want to do something and when they're in operation, is that they have a very high focus on what we call deliverables. So do the training, buy the equipment, purchase the IT, get everything ready. So they get all the deliverables ready. And quite often when they are in a new project, they say, we start here and we end here, and when we've ended it and we've bought the stuff we need, then we have implemented the thing. But the thing is, organizational capacity is going from having deliverables, equipment, technology, over in assuring effect. Because really, the reason why we are purchasing these equipment or doing something in our organization is not just have it there standing on the desk. It is to ensure that it's lived and used and there's an effect afterwards. And that is where the organization's ability to drive that process and get the people behind is extremely important. What is it that you do in order to do that? And some of the words, some of the things that I'm going to be talking about just briefly here are mentioned up here. Organizational versus individual capacity. Quite often we believe if we train someone, the organization is going to do well, but that's individual capacity. As soon as the individual is gone, we don't have that capacity any longer. How do we ensure that the organization is actually keeping it after this person has left? The industry's approach towards performance, I'm going to be touching upon that. Leadership to drive human performance. I think you were talking about that, Hans. How do we use that? Organizational performance process. I'm going to try and give you an example of how we can actually integrate the organization, or how the organization can actually get human performance into different work processes and HR processes. Now, hypothesis. That's something I claim. Dysfunctional organizations can have brilliant people. Is that true? Can we actually have organizations with extremely clever people but completely dysfunctional as an organization? I must say, I'm sometimes pretty amazed when I have a chance to look into or be invited into work with shipping companies, that you have really, really clever people there, well trained with all the CVs and experiences needed. But when you look at the output the organization produces and how they go about it, then you're thinking, what kind of focus do they have? And quite often, again, when we talk about developing their company, they say, we've got to do training, we've got to do training, we've got to do training. And I would not say training is not important, but it's just one part of the parameter. Now, just a small definition here, I won't go too much into it. Organizational capacity commonly refers to an organization's ability to perform work. Ability to perform work. How good are we actually at running a shipping company, you could say, and at what level? Organizational capacity are the enabling factors that disallow an organization to perform its function, and it decides its output. There's input, something comes in, and there's an output. The organization, the way people work together, they interact together, the systems they have, the way they use it, and the effect they create, creates an effect, an output. And the way we organize this isn't something we need to give attention, especially also seen from a safety perspective, and I'm going to show you an example of that. Now, just to have a typical consultancy model here to try and explain what I'm aiming at, you could say, on one side, any organization, a shipping company, has some input. We have some factors. There's a market, there's technology, there's politics, economy, legislation, everything here we need to attend to. Everyone has to do that. Regardless of wherever you, what segment you might be in, everyone has to deal with this. Now, then it comes into the company, and then the company has to try and deal with it. And this is where the trouble starts, of course, because this is where we have to show that we are clever. And some of the things we have to deal with are standards, we have visions, we have leadership, management styles, we have staff skills, organizational structure, systems, IT, equipment, work process. All these things, they interact. And how well do they interact? And how clever are we in making them actually work together? Are we having IT systems which are not integrated in a work process? I see that all the time. We can just look at the SMS with all the procedures. We have everything in the system, but how well are they actually integrated in the work process? Now, all this decides the output. And as you can see, I've given them different colors, and I will explain why. Okay, the output, of course, is ambitions and ability. Now, how much time do I have left?
You have 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay, I'll try and do it brief. Then I would just, Vision, direction, we need to have standards and direction, and seen from a safety perspective, we far too often hear people having different perceptions of simple things like what is a good toolbox talk, what is a good debrief. You have different answers to all these things. We need to have systems to support us. This is where the industry is typically very strong because of compliance needs on the yellow side. We also have a very high focus on trying and cultivating performance. The blue side, you could say, we try to cultivate the employee competencies, attitudes, and leadership. But where the trouble starts, and this is where the persistency of the organization is important, is to take training systems, standards, into something which is walking on two legs, organizationally embedding it. And typically, if you spend 1/5 of your time writing standard systems and trying to cultivate performance, we say, in my world, you spend 4/5 of your time trying to make it work. Going from idea to something which is walking on two legs requires far more than just finding the deliverables. And let me give you a very specific example here. One thing we are, working on very often with our clients, and that is to say, okay, we want as an organization to develop seafarer safety competencies. And if we just look at it from a marine HR perspective, how strong is our processes that we need to have in place to ensure that this is working. And if we look at a seafarer, well, he's recruited, he or she is inducted, then he or she is in position, and then promoted. 4 simple things we all know are going to happen. And you could say, if we are trying to look at it from, as I said, a safety performance perspective, you have some existing safety competencies of the seafarer here, and you have some, we could call them best practice, or you could say your controlled competencies. And if you look at all the organizational processes, the formal processes mentioned here, so how do you assess safety performance competencies during the recruitment? How do you do that? How do you control that process during your induction? How do you lead it, and how do colleagues support that process? In position, one of the projects we are working on right now with many companies, I think we're engaged with about 7 or 8 shipping companies as we speak, is the effectiveness of the appraisal process. Far too many, I've been given the cue here, far too many companies, when you're talking about appraisal, it's not an appraisal, it's a tick box, up for rehire or not up for rehire. So there's no evaluation, there's no development. So the organization is not properly controlling the process. And then I could continue down the line here. So what I'm trying to say here is, just to sum up, is organizational performance drives human performance. And me, coming into many organizations, really feel that there's a lot to gain if we start looking at the organizational processes and the way we organize things, rather than just looking at technology, systems, IT as individual things. Thank you.